Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live, live and uncut podcast. Today, I've got an old friend of ours, BBC guru, international speaker, and thoroughly good guy who understands economics. And some of us struggle with that, understanding what's going on. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, welcome to Monday Night Live. Thank you so
Well,
much for joining us.
Derek,
Justin, you
thank you for
better
asking me back.
yeah, you better tell us what's going on in the world because we're all getting a bit confused in
Ah,
January
well,
2024.
can anyone make sense of it? I mean, really, it is really just like a sort of Clive Cussler novel. How exciting can it get? Except this is not exciting; it's just actually frightening. Now, this is a classic example where we can all scare, frighten ourselves, really to our wits' end by all the things that are going wrong. That's the political issues, whether it's the Hutus or any other elements of Ukraine and things like that. And I always find it fantastic when you've got this wall of bad news coming through, which is actually quite a regular thing. And despite all of that, over the past few years, we've had COVID, we've had a banking crisis and inflationary issues, boats getting stuck in the Suez Canal. And yet, despite that, the global economy is still growing. And it's half what it was 4 or 5 years ago. So it is, not say it's firm and solid, not at all, but it has shown actually how it can absorb an awful lot of punches, this capitalist system. But it needs to be run very carefully. And we were talking a few minutes ago about the issue with regard to making sure people do the right thing, and not just coming out with the buzzwords of environmental, sustainable, and governance, but actually proving that what you're doing is good business done the right way and giving people a choice. They will go to the ones that are actually providing that sort of facilities and services because they don't want to be dragged into the mud with anybody else. The trouble is, you can't always trust the companies that are actually telling the truth anyway. We've got lots of investment companies in Britain, a lot of which are utterly useless, and one or two, I'm afraid, I tell them to their face, have a habit of lying. And there's one in particular who I shouldn't mention, but they huge great debate and conference, and they stood up and said, "We don't charge for investment management." I was chairing the thing. I said, interrupted him and said, "Yes, you do." And he said, "Oh, look, our fees are absolutely nothing." Actually, what happened, of course, was the individuals don't pay; it's the company that pays. So I don't know. I shouldn't be rude about St James's Place. Oh, sorry, there it goes. And so it's companies in that position where they have a great responsibility to look after people's money. And it's not just a matter of, you can hear it said, how much money have you got? Oh, we've got X billion. No, you haven't. You've got nil. It's the clients who've got X billion, and you've got to treasure and look after that. And your success should be measured, and your income should be measured on how you're doing in terms of investment. Consistently, not just trying to do the fashion fads, which come, as we know, next year's tank top. But a classic example we had in the past 2 or 3 years, well, a bit longer than that now, was Woodford, UK fund manager,
Mhm.
ex-Invesco. And he got to the stage where, as Invesco, he found himself stuck with a huge ego. And so he left, persuaded people to put some money up for him, and has specialized in an equity income fund, which is fine or very well. Now, he and his ex-partner, they used to work together in business partner, in Invesco, were running effectively the same portfolios, and they would discuss what they were doing. So you look at their portfolios, virtually identical, in FTSE 250 companies. So what actually meant that they were probably controlling, for a good number of them, between 35 and 45% of the stock, which
Wow.
meant they were the market. So how come they were making money, or they're going up in price? Well, of course they're going up in price because any stock that's coming through, if they start buying it, other people follow it up. It goes. It then also means they can't sell it, because if they then sort of start pulling out it, then the whole thing deflates quite quickly.
Yeah.
Also, there's an equity income fund, that well-known company called Purple Bricks. Who? Well, anyone outside the United Kingdom wouldn't know who they were. And frankly, most people in Britain wouldn't know. But it's basically an online, simplified estate agent. Nice concept for it. And yet, this company wasn't a public company. Actually, has never made a profit. And at the moment, his current plans can't actually see where the profit's coming from. And so he put that into his equity income fund. It wasn't tradable income, but tradable stock, and it wasn't actually providing any income. But apart from that, it's fine. And so people are being pulled into this because it's a story which sounds so good. And then you have a particular stockbroker, actually Hargreaves Lansdown, who introduced a separate area where you could buy these fashionable funds. What's a separate area? Well, it's got an extra charge on it. So you're being encouraged to actually go into these ones you didn't really know what you're investing in, but they've got a great track record apparently. And you can buy them through this particular broker and you get special service, which costs you an extra 0.25% to 0.5%. What? This is greed, stupidity, and it's bad for the industry. It's awful for the clients, because apart from the else, they don't know what's going on. There is a key issue for people is doing the right thing. And it takes a while to build up that reputation. You're not just sitting there playing to the noughts and crosses or trying to pick on the next stock. It's a discipline, it's a process, and give people confidence that you're not going to be right every single time, but over a period of time, you can say, we're going to be doing 5, 6, 7%, whatever level you want to pitch, so long as you think you can achieve that. So I fear we still have this short-term issue with investments like private equity and things like that. Stockbrokers who still, whether they can charge commission or not, varies. Again, looking very short-term. So longer-term investment coming through. In the UK, we have been very bad at indeed. And it's interesting, my last firm, Seven Investment Management, which took me a long time to actually find the right buyer, we ended up actually selling it to the lowest price. And the reason being, they were the ones who had the right ethic. That was Caledonia Investment. And their attitude to investing, average period of holding a stock was 15 years.
Wow.
Whereas if you look at the private equity people, it's 3 years, but if you get it wrong, it's 5 years. There is not a 3-year cycle. And I'm pleased to say, actually, now Caledonia has sold out to one of the Canadian pension funds, who also have a view of long-term steady investments. That's a reputation they've had, lived up to. I'm delighted, although I'm not part of it anymore, that it's actually looks at it's find a good berth.
Good. Now, you talked about trust. Know, like, and trust is the rules, in our business. You got to know them, then you got to like them, then you got to trust them. I
You
get
mean
this.
Elizabeth Trust?
No, I feel that that's deteriorated like mad recently. Post
Yeah,
office,
yeah.
Trump, goodness knows what else. What's your view? Am I off beam on that?
No, you're not. And it is really deeply depressing, certainly in the United Kingdom, when you look what's happened post-Brexit. It doesn't matter what your views on Brexit are. We have just lost the confidence, the momentum. And when you look across our potential leaders, they are deeply unimpressive and have very little, not just market and investment experience, but they become the professional politicians. You do your PPE at Oxbridge or wherever. You then get you become a SPAD, special advisor to one of the MPs. You then go in and get selected for seats you'll never win in the month of Sundays, but you've been blooded as far as they're concerned. And then you go in and get a seat which is safer, and that's you done. Well done. So what actually do you know how the economy works? What experience have you actually had at the sharp end and actually have running a business? And running a business is waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat, wondering if you've still got one. And I'm afraid the politicians, when they say, and we're going to raise the minimum wage, which is all very laudable. But hang on, they're not paying the minimum wage. It's us people running the businesses who are paying the increased wage, and it may be justifiable. But how dare government sit there and say, we've been able to increase their income? No, you haven't. What you've been, you are just trying to get other people to do it for you. Be honest about it, and actually show companies companies and also voters that actually, again, there is room for doing the right thing responsibly, giving reasonable returns in the long term period.
Let's have a quick whiz round the world with geopolitical issues,
Yeah,
can we? Where are we going to start? In America?
I suppose so. We start and finish there, don't we? And it is, again, it's a look at a horror when you see the Trump campaign going on. And it's nothing not imaginative, because you actually listen to him talking. Wonder, do you think there's a little scintilla of truth somewhere here? So he is a grifter of the first order. But that's one thing. And then, of course, the opportunity of having a sprightly Biden on the other side doesn't fill you with confidence either. However, put them to one side. Actually, they don't run the economy. The American economy is run by, well, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo living in Little Rock, Arkansas, shopping at Walmart, and they own their house. And they, I'm sure my colleagues will correct me, obviously in the States, but account for about 65% of the US economy. Now, if you upset Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo, the economy, and not just the American, but the world economy, will feel it very quickly indeed. And quite rightly, after the banking crisis, the American authorities focused on the key area where you had to try and recover, and that was banking. Get banking in a position where, and I don't mean investment banking, I'm proper to trade commercial banking, that people have access to trading capital and being able to carry out their business in an efficient way. But as opposed to investment banking, which is a totally different philosophy. The problem I find we've got in this country is that we've taken away a lot of those, I say they sound old-fashioned, but disciplines of running money, because people now have a punt on Bitcoin. And now we've got to the position where Bitcoin, and I think the regulators finally gave up, saying it can now form an ETF, exchange traded fund, a tracker. And so you're now going to be tracking something which does what? Nothing. It is incredibly volatile. The bit I always find quite funny is El Salvador, for a very short while, we're going to try and replace their currency with Bitcoin. Well, given that their previous currency was the colon, slightly worrying. I'm quite sure which is better.
Wow. So we look forward to seeing all these elections. What about the UK? Keir Starmer sits behind me at Arsenal. He hasn't got a minder at the moment. Perhaps he's going to get one.
Well, it looks like it, doesn't it? Because it's not a matter of policies. I don't think, frankly, the Conservatives got an idea that if you give people a short-term tax break, that's going to get your vote. No, because the one word that runs the economy, I go back to Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo, is confidence. And merely knocking an amount off national insurance or a bit off inheritance tax or whatever it has to be, isn't going to do it. They don't trust the government, and they look at the leadership and they're deeply unimpressive. And the problem is, when you turn around and look at the other parties, they're not much better. So I do fear for Britain at the moment. Now, how do we get out of that? Well, my view is look at the areas which are positive and growing. I know where they are, give me the addresses of where they are. Primarily, they're around the high-tech business parks and centres next to the more developed universities. And as ever, these businesses have now learned to actually create technology businesses, and they breed. Once you've got one lot, they tend to actually split up into other areas, but they need the finance to be able to get to the next stage. And we don't have that. Our concept of finance is well, private equity. No, you need a longer term investor for this, not someone who's going to punt the stuff for you. So what happens is our dear cousins in America come along and say, cracking good company, I tell you what, why don't we take you over to California? And that's what we've been seeing. We start these exciting businesses, great opportunities, and then they go. And why is this happening? Because A, the politicians don't understand it, but more worryingly, for those of us of an age, and in the United Kingdom, will remember Yes Minister as Prime Minister, and you then had Sir Humphrey Appleby, the long-term civil servant, and he knew everything in the entire system, and because he was in a position where he had been in that job for a long time, inside out. You go to the Treasury now, actually it's been like this for several years, you'll find people perfectly bright, good Oxford graduates and other players as well, done very well, but they've adopted, well done, the civil service, modern HR policies. Well, that's very good. What does that mean? It means that every 3 years, you're going to go from the Foreign Office, you're going to go to the Treasury. From Treasury, you're going to go to sports or something like that. So you're intelligence across a broad range and an expert in none, which is very sad indeed, because you need to have people in the Treasury who understand what levers need to be pulled in order to get the economy going. And a classic example of this we saw with, obviously, the Bank of England, which apparently is independent. And of course, it is completely independent. Apart from the fact, actually, the governor of the Bank of England is appointed by the Treasury. The 4 permanent members from the Bank of England are approved of by the Treasury. And the 4 independent people also have to be approved of and selected by the Treasury. And there are 2 members of the Treasury sitting on the meeting. But apart from that, it's completely independent. But it showed over the past few months the stupidity and the lack of experience and knowledge. We were putting up interest rates to try and cut inflation. Now, hang on a second. When we were Britain 30 years ago, and we had high inflation, it was embedded in there. And so we had to find a way of actually cooling the consumer spending. And how do you do that? That's with interest rates. So inflation has gone up this time because of the consumer. No, it's not because of consumer spending. Consumers are feeling extremely bruised, diametrically the opposite. It was the supply chains, which we saw in the first period of with COVID and such like, and those supply chains break up. Derek, remember all those awful consultants you'd have coming through, clutching a copy of the Harvard Business School report. And they all sort of said, right, our idea of this is we're going to take out costs, and it became a sort of mantra. And you had to do, because they were the business consultants, they knew what they were doing.
Mm.
Unfortunately, what they didn't do was actually provide long-term views and opinions. And forgive me for American cousins, look what happened to Boeing. Hi, the global leader in aircraft manufacture. Not the fact that someone left the bolts off and the door flew open or whatever the issue was. But the point is, there had been real focus on short-term development for the shareholder. Hang on, you're making planes here. Now, the key issue is we've got to build planes that work and tend not to fall out of the skies. One, sort of by all means, make sure your investors are getting a good return. But I have to say again, when you look at the rewards that was handed out compared to the risk that was there, is quite unconscionable, just like we've seen with the post office as well. And why do they say that? Well, I don't choose my own salary. It's done by we have a separate unit who does that, evaluates international. And I have my colleagues who are ex directors in various companies, and it's a sort of golden circle. And you suddenly see the same names popping up the entire time. And that's why you see companies almost starting off with this higher level. That's what you're going to be a director or non-executive director, non-executive chairman, without actually realizing not that's just what the market demands. That's not true. As opposed to actually saying, I've got the right person to be able to fulfill that job. Sorry, Derek.
No, no, that's fine. While we're on interest rates, has
Yeah.
has the Bank of England's policy brought down inflation, or was it a bit of luck? And the second
Yeah.
question is, how does ChatGPT fit in to all these new areas?
Right. Well, let's do the first one. The answer is, moving towards the Bank of England. The Bank of England's got only one tool it can use, and that, of course, is adjusting interest rates. So when someone turns around and says, "Oh, we've got inflation," turn to the Bank of England and say, "Now, what do you do? How are you going to deal with this?" Well, so I'll get my magic tool out, which is I can put up interest rates. But what are you going to do to put up interest rates? There isn't a consumer boom. This is being caused at the moment because of supply difficulties, grain coming out of Ukraine and other issues. And that's where we saw inflationary pressure coming through. So putting up domestic interest rates doesn't actually do anything to help that at all. What they should have been doing is focusing on how do they help businesses themselves, not by extra grants, certainly not investment from the government, they used to set it, but by creating the right environments of tax incentives for more business to develop and have the confidence for investors from smaller to larger to be able to develop it. But merely saying, I'm going to promise you a tax cut of X, Y, and Z, you're not going to win an election just on that. And so go back to your point, did the Bank of England actually pull inflation down? The answer is no, they didn't. The issue would very well start to apply if you had wages being embedded into the inflation cycle. That hasn't really happened yet. So one of the issues I think was awful that you had the Bank of England sleeping on the job was that actually we had emergency banking rates after the crisis. And as the crisis passed, we left the rates low. Actually, what you should have been doing is letting them grow slowly upwards again. Instead, you're going to have another, I think it's 750,000 people this year who are going to be coming off their short-term trackers, going on to something else. And you know the old story, they were on 2%, and now they're going to be paying 4.5%. It's a little difference. No, it's double, for God's sake. How people are going to have paid double on their mortgage at a time of their life when they can actually barely keep the electric lights on? This is stupidity of reactive central banks not really understanding, they've got a great pedigree and background, what the effects are, and how do you actually make sure that translates into the real economy and give people that vital word again, confidence.
Okay. What about artificial intelligence?
Well, I could do with either, frankly. It is fascinating because it's one of those things that, again, you're going to have to go back to definition. What exactly do we mean? The bit I found particularly frightening was talking to some sixth formers and how many of those sixth formers, not just this year, but for the past few years, obviously there were sixth formers then, were using AI to be able to help with their various essays and such like. Now, it's one thing having information off the internet because it's a great encyclopedia of stuff, but actually have a mechanism which is doing the work for you. Your brain, therefore, doesn't have to engage very much. That, I think, is actually very frightening indeed. AI does not mean necessarily we're going to have Arnold Schwarzenegger doing Terminator 1, 2, 3, and all the other bits and pieces. But it's the insidious way that now AI's come in so that sixth formers can actually have someone else writing their papers for them, and it's a lazy way out of it. So AI can be really dynamic and exciting, but people haven't really gone through really the issues of the risk that's there and how we're going to try and manage it. And of course, again, look at the most recent risk with the Houthis attacking the tankers and commercial ships up the Red Sea. It's already had a huge impact on container rates and things like that. And one of the most difficult issues is Actually, what you've got, of course, a lot of containers come from the east to the west, but there are not many going back the other way. And of course, going back the other way through the Suez Canal was much cheaper. Going around the Cape of Good Hope, or probably No Hope, actually is make life more difficult. So actually, I think it's this issue of understanding what sort of economy we want to have. Yes, it's obviously a capitalist economy. It needs to be managed so it can grow according to the confidence of entrepreneurs and people taking longer term view. Again, going back to Bitcoin, some of the boys and girls I know who thoroughly enjoyed it because they're having a bet on Bitcoin because they knew how to do it. Because it was something they could do on their PC. Whereas old farts like me wouldn't be doing it because, frankly, we didn't understand what it was. Not too sure they do either. But what they did know is it's volatile. So price down, buy now. I'm an investment expert. No, you're not. You've just found another way of going to the horses without the horse bells.
Now, come on, what about global conflicts? How are they since you've been with us for 4 years, since I've been doing this? The conflicts get worse. Is that because I'm interviewing you, or is that because things are getting worse?
I think there's one thing particularly British about this, when people sit there and say, "Oh, we're fighting the old enemy," to which the answer is, which one's that then? And there are not many countries left in the world we haven't actually had a war with. But it is the conflicts, obviously, if they've been building up. But don't ever think that they weren't horrors going on anyway, whether you have to look at what's happening in Rwanda and other areas, and they're not all resolved. But the particular issues we've got now is interesting with Ukraine and coming out of Russia. But funny enough, we've managed to manage our way around that. Not totally in a secure manner, but actually they're not quite as on their knees as they were a couple of years back. Same with the oil price as well. And gas prices. Other sources have been found. So they're not so dependent on the Qataris or other key areas which would normally go through the Red Sea. So we've got a little bit more experience with that. The wrong side of this is, of course, what we did in terms of quantitative easing, which is, of course, two words which, if you go to an economics a book of 20 years ago, look at the index, there's no mention of it. It didn't exist. Well, it did exist, except it wasn't called that. And so the position where we've got 1 trillion of debt, and we've now got 3 trillions of debt. And that's in a space of what, 10 years? And I remember after the last crisis we had, and talking to a mate at the Treasury, and with all the quantitative issues, I said, well, I assume we can't be doing that again. He said, too right, we'll never be able to do it. We won't have the investor confidence that we had before. 4 years later, what are we doing? Exactly the same. Now, just I'd add a bit of icing to all the cherry on top of the icing. I have to say, a fairly incompetent cherry known as Liz Truss, who people will say, but she was encouraging growth. That's motherhood and apple pie. We don't all sit there saying, I want a bit of slow loosening. No, actually what she was doing was damaging Britain's reputation. And what did that cost us? It cost us round about 3/4 of a main point on our investments, government gilts, and that directly affects us. And give you an idea, our interest payment now just on our debt, we've talked about this before, Derek, used to be about 4 or 5 years ago, about 55 billion a year, which is roughly the same level as the defence budget. Now, the figure's going to come up at over 100, probably 110 billion. Which means it's going to be, we've got National Health Service, pensions, those pots tend to be bigger, but actually when your interest rates, your debt payments start coming up to such levels, this is not sustainable unless you can give those investors confidence that Britain can work its way out of it. And Britain's reputation over the past few years, which, as pathetic, I like talking things up, not down, but actually look at that leadership. I wouldn't be following that with any great excitement, hopefully waiting for the next wave coming through. But you then have to go back and say, actually, the politicians may be wrong, but we have excellent elements in our economy, which we had the right form of investment coming through. That'll be great for the country, and not just going back to trying to assemble other people's cars and things like that, or having stupid things like HS2, but actually making sure we've got the tax base there for longer term investment to help those smaller businesses become medium sized, and they're the ones who will have greater influence. Where is tomorrow's large corporate? And the answer is no idea, because it's just been bought up by Silicon Valley investment business.
So the final question before we close Monday Night Live, and I invite you back on the 16th of February, live and uncut, to the Victory Services Club where we've been before,
And don't forget,
is When there's an election in the UK, are the Labour government going to be able to handle it, or will they vote Keir Starmer out and put Corbyn back in?
No, they're not going to put Corbyn back in.
Oh,
And the reason being, because most of them know full well that their jobs would be on the line as well. No, quite rightly, whilst Starmer doesn't exactly encourage you, he's not a sort of a great leader. You know, come on, boys, follow me out of the trench. And you'll be sitting there saying, no, carry on, sir, we'll come on after you. And so he's not a leader of men. He's a technician, and remember his legal background, very good at taking up information, being able to argue the point, but not inspirational leadership, and getting around him the right people to actually move it to the next stage. So I'm deeply depressed when it comes to that. Look at those leaders. Sorry, what was the second half of the question? I've forgotten.
well, will they be able to handle it? He's got a couple of women sitting both either side of him. They look quite intelligent. Look like they know what they're doing. One worked for the Bank of England, didn't she?
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. So, yeah, what you have to do, just as actually, of course, what Blair did with the prawn cocktail but marketing before he came in as Prime Minister with Mr. Mendelsohn. And that was to actually get City supporting Labour, wouldn't even want to say supporting, but at least being not negative about Labour and see them as a credible alternative. And that's what's been happening now. But they don't have the talents that, whether you like them or not, of Blair and Mendelsohn and the others. There's nothing too inspirational there. But they're heading for the middle ground. Quite rightly, Starmer sort of said, we need to be in that middle ground to win the election. As a bonus, we might even pick up some Scottish seats, which are always in Glasgow, with the wonderful back pocket of the Labour Party. You always knew that actually Glasgow would vote Labour until they voted Scottish Nationalist. Now, thank heaven for the strange beastie of the ex-leader of Scotland, Mrs. Sturgeon, and the fact that it's hardly covered herself in glory. But I'm afraid when we first had devolution to create those senates or parliaments, and I looked at Scotland, we're going to end up with, I remember I had this conversation with my father donkeys years ago, it will end up being the councillors of Lothian and the councillors of Strathclyde, which is basically Edinburgh and Glasgow. And the local councillors of both those areas aren't exactly the most dynamic people to really understand what's going on, as can be seen with the lack of understanding in those companies trying to put in more investment in the business. And the most worrying thing you've seen most recently is actually the tax, not so much tax cuts, but rises. And the cost of being in Scotland and maybe Wales in due course will mean that some people turn around and say, very nice, but I'm not paying extra tax here. I'll go down to Berwick-on-Tweed.
And that happens all over the world.
Yeah.
Justin, thanks for joining us again today. You always get more people on the show. Thank you so much. And the speed you speak at means that we've covered 2 hours material in about half an hour. So that's absolutely
well. Everyone can go wake up now and get some more interesting bits.
And we'll see you on the 16th of February at the Victory Services Club at an early hour for a coffee and to get the session going. Can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give Justin the usual vote of thanks in the normal way? That's on
Thank you.
Justin. I'll close the show down now, and we'll have a quick discussion. There's some questions in the chat box for you, which if you can stay on, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Yeah, Justin, thanks for joining us once again.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure, Derek.